Officer Claire thought it was just another patrol until Shadow broke protocol and dragged her into the dark. What they found in that alley was a girl, a van, and a truth too painful for words. The night was quiet in Oakridge, the kind of quiet that made Officer Claire Morgan uneasy. She held the leash of her partner, a black German shepherd named Shadow, who padded at her side with the steady confidence of a seasoned canine. The streets were damp from a light rain, reflecting the glow of street lamps and neon signs from the corner shops. Claire moved with practiced ease, scanning the empty sidewalks, her hand resting near her holster, but her attention kept drifting to Shadow. He was alert, more than usual, his ears twitching as if he could hear something far beyond her reach. They turned down Main Street, a route they had walked hundreds of times, when suddenly Shadow froze. His body stiffened, nose lifted to the air, and his tail straightened. "Easy," Claire murmured, giving the command to heel, but Shadow ignored it. Instead, he let out a low growl that rumbled from deep in his chest. Before Claire could tighten her grip, Shadow yanked forward, dragging her toward a narrow alley between two shuttered stores. "Shadow, no," she hissed, pulling hard on the leash. But the shepherd didn't slow. His instincts were stronger than her orders. The air in the alley was thick with the smell of gasoline and wet concrete. Claire's boots splashed through shallow puddles as she fought to keep up. At the far end, dimly lit by a flickering bulb, stood a man. He had one hand gripping the shoulder of a little girl, his other clutching a set of keys that jingled as he shoved her toward a dark van. The girl's hair was tangled, her face pale, her small body trembling as she stumbled forward. She made no sound, not even a cry for help. It was as though her voice had been stolen. Shadow's growl became a roar as he lunged, the leash ripping through Claire's hands. He closed the distance in seconds, teeth bared, muscles surging with fury. The man spun around, startled, eyes wide with panic, as the shepherd came at him. He shoved the girl aside and cursed, fumbling for the van door. Claire drew her weapon and shouted, "Police! Don't move!" Her voice echoed off the alley walls, sharp and commanding. The girl crumpled to the ground, clutching her knees, but her wide eyes never left Shadow. The dog had planted himself between her and the man, his teeth snapping, his body ready to strike. The man hesitated for a heartbeat too long before bolting toward the driver's side. Tires screeched as the van tore out of the alley, vanishing into the night. Claire rushed forward, kneeling beside the girl. Her hands shook as she brushed wet hair from the child's face. "You're safe now," she whispered, though her own heart hammered with fear. The girl did not speak, did not cry, but her small hand reached out and clung to Shadow's fur like a lifeline. The shepherd stood tall, chest heaving, eyes locked on the empty street where the van had fled. He had broken every rule, but in that moment, Claire knew he had been right. Claire knelt in the alley, her hands trembling slightly as she held the little girl close. Shadow's fur was slick with rain, his chest heaving as he scanned the empty street, every muscle tense and ready. Claire's mind raced, caught between the rigid rules of her training and the undeniable truth in Shadow's eyes. She had trained for years to maintain control over her partner, to guide him with precision, to ensure that he never acted impulsively. Yet there was something different about this night, something primal and urgent that she could not ignore. Shadow had sensed danger in a way that went beyond commands and leashes, and now Claire had to decide whether to enforce control or follow instinct. The girl in her arms was small, fragile, trembling against her chest, her dark hair damp and clinging to her cheeks. Claire felt the weight of responsibility press down on her, heavier than any equipment or badge. The girl's eyes were wide, unblinking, watching Shadow as if he were her only anchor in a world that had been silent and terrifying for far too long. Claire whispered, "It's okay. You're safe now." But the words felt hollow. She could not be sure the girl even understood them, for she had not spoken in months, since the day she had been taken. Her voice had been silenced by fear, by the hands of someone who thought that a little girl could be invisible. Shadow barked sharply, a sound full of warning, and his ears twitched toward the direction the van had fled. Claire's heart sank as she thought of the man who had nearly vanished with the girl into the night. She tightened her grip on the child, feeling the damp warmth of her small body and the faint tremble that betrayed lingering terror. The training that told her to control Shadow, to restrain him and follow protocol, warred against the raw, undeniable instinct that had saved the girl. Shadow's growl was low and steady, a promise and a warning at the same time. Claire realized she could not force him back into obedience, not tonight. He had seen what she had not, and he had acted before it was too late. A police radio crackled nearby, breaking the tense silence, but Claire did not answer immediately. Her eyes stayed on Shadow as he pawed at the wet asphalt, alert and ready, refusing to relax even as the girl clung to him. She felt a surge of gratitude, admiration, and fear all at once. Shadow had chosen to break the rules, to trust instinct over order, and in doing so, he had saved a life. The girl whispered again, a sound so faint that Claire almost thought she had imagined it, but it was enough. Her hand pressed into Shadow's fur, small and desperate, and Claire felt a spark of hope that had nothing to do with words. The alley remained quiet, save for the soft patter of rain and Shadow's careful breathing. Claire finally allowed herself a deep breath, understanding that this moment would be questioned, analyzed, and scrutinized by the department. Yet she could not regret it. Shadow had done what training alone could not, and in his loyalty and courage, Claire saw a truth that rules could never capture. Sometimes, to protect the innocent, you must trust the one who sees more than you do. Claire carried Lily carefully to the squad car, her arms steady even though her heart was racing. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the streets slick and reflective, and every shadow seemed heavier than it should be. Lily's small fingers clung to Shadow's thick fur, pressing into him as if he were the only thing holding her to the world she had been torn from. Claire glanced down at the girl, noticing the dark circles under her eyes, the way her lips pressed together, silent and trembling. Doctors had already said that the trauma had robbed her of words, that her voice had been silenced by fear, but Claire could see that Lily communicated in ways that went far beyond speaking. Every gesture, every touch, every look carried meaning, and Shadow understood it all without hesitation. Inside the car, Claire placed Lily gently on the back seat and crouched beside her, keeping Shadow close by the door. The dog's amber eyes were alert, scanning the empty streets, ready to spring at any sign of danger. Lily pressed herself closer to him, her small face buried in his fur, and for a moment, Claire allowed herself to feel hope. She had seen victims before, scared and quiet, but there was something different about Lily. She was not just frightened, she was wary, intelligent, and perceptive. She knew, even without words, how to protect herself. And she had chosen Shadow as her shield. Claire tried to speak softly, introducing herself and explaining what was happening. But Lily did not respond. She did not cry, she did not flinch, but her small hand never left Shadow's fur. Instead, she pointed to the wet street outside, her dark eyes wide and searching. Claire followed her gaze and understood immediately that Lily wanted to show her something, even though she could not speak it aloud. She reached for the radio to call for backup, but Lily's hand tightened on Shadow, and Claire paused. The girl needed time, needed trust, and Claire had no intention of rushing her. The ride to the hospital was quiet, save for the soft whine that escaped Shadow when he shifted slightly to stay close to Lily. Claire noticed how the girl's eyes never left the dog, how every twitch of his ears and every shift of his body seemed to give her courage. It was as if she drew strength from him, a bond that had formed in mere hours but felt unbreakable. Claire thought about the reports she had read about canine intuition, about the way canine officers could sense danger, trauma, and even hidden emotions, and she realized that what she was witnessing went beyond training. Shadow had not only saved Lily from physical harm, he had given her a tether to a world that had tried to swallow her whole. At the hospital, nurses prepared a quiet room, and Claire stayed by Lily's side as the girl climbed into bed, with Shadow lying protectively at her feet. Though she could not speak, Lily reached out and touched Claire's arm briefly, a small gesture of trust. Claire knew that communication was not always spoken. Sometimes it was felt, lived, and shared in moments like this, through touch, through presence, and through the unspoken understanding between a girl and a dog who refused to let her be lost. Claire sat in the dimly lit evidence room, watching the grainy surveillance footage flicker on the screen. The van rolled through the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness, but the figure inside was obscured, shadowed, unrecognizable. Officials muttered about coincidences, about a missing child found unharmed and no clear evidence of abduction. Claire clenched her jaw. She had been a police officer long enough to know that thin evidence could mean a case was quietly buried, and that haunted her more than anything. She looked down at Lily, who was perched on a small chair beside a table, crayons scattered across the surface. The girl's hands moved quickly, almost frantically, drawing shapes and lines that only she could fully understand. Each sketch told the same story. Shadow's muscular form stood in the alley, his ears alert and his teeth bared. The van loomed behind him, and a man with hollow eyes watched, his expression empty and menacing. Claire could see the fear and memory etched into every line, the terror Lily could not speak but could put to paper. She carefully picked up one of the drawings and brought it closer to Shadow. Immediately his ears twitched, his hackles rose, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. The detectives, who had come to review the footage, glanced at the drawings and exchanged uneasy looks. "We can't charge someone based on a child's drawing," one said, his tone clipped, as though he were already tired of the case. "The video doesn't show a face. The van's stolen, and there's no other proof. We have to consider that this could be," he hesitated, "a coincidence." Claire felt anger rising, but she pushed it down. Shadow nudged her hand with his nose, as if reminding her that he had sensed something in that alley, something the cameras could not see. Lily pressed a crayon into Claire's palm, her dark eyes pleading. She did not need to speak. The drawings were evidence in themselves. Every line, every dark hollow eye, every stiff posture of the dog told a story of fear and survival. Hours passed as Claire Cross checked every detail she could think of. She replayed the footage, enhanced what clarity the program could offer, and compared it to Lily's sketches. The shapes of the van, the angles of the alley, the posture of the man, it all lined up too precisely to be coincidence. Shadow growled again, low and insistent, and Lily's small hand pressed into his fur for reassurance. Claire made a note, quietly swearing that she would not let this case be ignored, even when the room emptied. When the other officers left shaking their heads or muttering about overreaction, Claire stayed. She traced the lines of Lily's drawings with her finger, whispered softly that she believed her, and watched Shadow, who refused to leave the girl's side. Somewhere in those sketches was the truth no one else wanted to see, a truth that would not stay silent, a truth that Shadow would protect until it was heard. The next morning, Claire sat across from Captain Reynolds, the weight of the day already pressing down on her shoulders. His office smelled faintly of coffee and old leather, the walls lined with commendations that reminded her why she had joined the force in the first place. "Morgan," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "you need to control your dog. Nines are tools, not partners in decision-making. He doesn't lead, you do. You let him run today, and a van could have disappeared. Evidence destroyed. Someone could have been hurt. You understand the rules." Claire nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. Shadow lay in the corner, ears perked even in the office, amber eyes tracking every movement she made. She could feel the pulse of his instincts, the silent understanding between them. He wasn't just a tool. He was the reason Lily was alive. She tried to explain this to Reynolds, but the words felt heavy, inadequate. The captain didn't see the way the dog had stared down danger, how his nose had sniffed the truth, how his growl had warned them before any human could react. "I understand," she said finally, the tension in her voice clear. By evening, Shadow was restless. The patrol car sat parked, the streets of Oakridge quiet and empty. Claire tried to keep him calm, patting his broad head, commanding him to sit, to stay, to ignore the noises in the alleyways, but his amber eyes told her he sensed something else, something urgent. Lily sat nearby, small hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. Shadow kept glancing at her, pacing in short circles, scratching at the door as if the walls themselves hid secrets. Claire felt a tug at her chest. Every instinct she had as an officer told her to obey the rules, to keep Shadow under control, to follow procedure. But every instinct she had as a protector, as someone who had seen what a child's terror looked like, told her to trust him. Shadow's body moved with purpose, ears flat, tail rigid, ready to pounce or protect, and Claire realized that rules sometimes had to bend when lives were at stake. Then it happened. Shadow finally settled beside Lily, and the small girl, silent for months, rested her trembling hands on his thick fur. The dog lowered his head into her lap, steady and calm, and she pressed her cheek to his head. Her lips moved slowly, barely a whisper, but the sound was enough to make Claire freeze. "Hunter," she said. The word hung in the air like sunlight cutting through fog, fragile yet full of meaning. Shadow's ears twitched at the sound, and he pressed closer, as if confirming he had heard correctly. Claire swallowed, blinking back the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Rules were clear, yes, but so was the bond between the girl and the dog. The word, spoken for the first time in months, was a promise, a connection, a call to action. Shadow rested his head against her lap, steady and unyielding, as if saying he would follow her anywhere, protect her no matter what. Claire finally understood that leadership sometimes meant knowing when to follow, and that trust between a child and a dog could defy the rules and save a life in ways no manual could explain. Claire's heart pounded as she climbed into the patrol car, Shadow already sitting rigid in the passenger seat, nose twitching, ears perked toward the darkened streets. The city felt quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that made shadows stretch long and heavy. The captain's warnings echoed in her head. "Control your dog. He doesn't lead. You do." But Shadow's gaze was insistent, unwavering. Every instinct in her body told her this was not a time for hesitation. She started the engine and followed him down side streets and narrow alleys, the tires crunching on broken asphalt, the streetlights flickering overhead. Shadow's steps were precise, deliberate, his tail low but stiff. He moved with a purpose she couldn't ignore. Claire kept her hands tight on the wheel, her voice soft but firm, calling his name occasionally, but he never faltered. He knew the path, and she trusted him. The air smelled of damp earth and rust, the quiet broken only by the distant hum of a train. The trail led them through abandoned rail lines, weeds scraping the car doors as they drove past. Claire's pulse quickened, every sense on high alert. Shadow stopped at the end of a narrow track, pressed close to her, and then bolted ahead into the shadows. Claire leapt from the car, radio in hand, and followed him without thinking. Her boots crunched on gravel and broken glass, the night pressing around them like a living thing. Ahead, the warehouse loomed, dark and imposing, windows boarded, doors rusted shut. Shadow slipped inside with a low growl, and Claire's stomach tightened. She followed, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Chains hung from the ceiling, blankets and torn mattresses littered the floor, and a single, small child's shoe rested near the corner. Her stomach churned. This was a place meant to terrify, to trap, to silence. The walls seemed to echo with forgotten cries. Claire fumbled with her radio, voice trembling but controlled. "Dispatch, I've located a possible site connected to the missing girl. Coordinates coming in now," she whispered, her eyes scanning the shadows. Shadow's low growl rumbled through the warehouse, his body tense, ready to protect or attack at a moment's notice. She could almost feel the presence of the children who had been here, the silence they had been forced into, the terror they must have felt. By the time backup arrived, the place was empty, scrubbed clean as if it had never existed. No chains, no blankets, no shoe, just a hollow echo of what had been. The higher-ups doubted her story, their faces tight with skepticism, their radios full of questions she couldn't fully answer. Claire felt frustration gnaw at her, but Shadow pressed close, nuzzling her side, reminding her that some truths weren't seen in reports or photographs. They were smelled, felt, and understood. She looked at him and knew they would find them, whoever them was. Rules, procedures, and orders were in place for safety, but Shadow had shown her that sometimes the path to saving a life meant walking through doubt, ignoring limits, and following instincts that no one else could understand. The trail of shadows stretched before them, dark and uncertain, but neither of them hesitated. Claire had been walking Shadow down Main Street for what felt like hours, the sun dipping low behind the rooftops, casting long shadows that made the streets look smaller and more secretive. People bustled past, oblivious to the tension in the air, lost in their phones or conversations, while Shadow's nose twitched constantly, his amber eyes scanning everything with a focus that made Claire's chest tighten. She had tried to keep him calm, to follow protocol, but his body told a different story. His growl was low at first, almost subtle, a warning buried in muscle and instinct, but it grew steadily, vibrating through the leash until Claire could feel it in her fingers. At the corner, leaning against a lamppost, a man rested heavily on a cane. His gray hair shone faintly in the evening light, his clothes plain and unremarkable, his expression unreadable. Everyone around them passed without a second glance, assuming he was just an elderly man taking his evening stroll. But Lily froze, her small body stiff, her eyes wide and unblinking. Claire had noticed it immediately. The way the girl's fingers clenched into Shadow's fur, the way her feet refused to move forward. The signs were subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to Claire, trained to read fear and danger, they screamed alarm. Shadow's growl sharpened, a low, guttural sound that made a nearby dog whine and pull at its leash. His teeth were bare, his hackles raised, his body rigid and ready. Claire's hand tightened around the leash, knowing every rule drilled into her said to move along, to not make waves, to maintain order. But Shadow refused. He planted himself firmly on the sidewalk, his eyes locked on the man, his every muscle coiled like a spring. Claire followed his gaze and saw the subtle movements, a twitch of the fingers gripping the cane, a tightening of the jaw, the way the man's eyes flicked rapidly, as though calculating, planning. Lily's silent terror made Claire's stomach drop. The girl's body trembled, her breathing shallow. Claire knelt slightly, whispering to Lily, "It's okay, I've got you." But Lily only pressed closer to Shadow, her small hands clutching his fur as though he were the only thing keeping her safe. Shadow's growl grew louder, a warning that vibrated through the empty space between them, and the man shifted slightly, leaning more heavily on the cane. There was no way to ignore the tension, no way to pretend this was ordinary. Claire made a decision. She let Shadow step forward, her body following him instinctively, ready to act, ready to protect. The man's eyes flicked toward her, briefly revealing something cold and unreadable. Before returning to the street, Shadow did not relent. He held the line, refusing to move, refusing to yield, and Claire knew instinctively that this was a lead that could not be ignored. The rules were clear, but Shadow's instincts were clearer, and Claire trusted them above all else. Somewhere in that quiet standoff, between the growl and the frozen terror of a 9-year-old girl, the truth waited to be uncovered. Claire had learned to read Lily in ways that no one else could. The girl had not spoken in months, her voice silenced by fear and trauma, but her mind was sharp, her eyes observant, and her hands precise. On quiet nights in the small living room of the safe house, she would tap Shadow's ear, squeeze his fur, or point with trembling fingers, and the dog would respond instantly. Following her unspoken instructions, Claire had tried to enforce the rules, tried to insist that Shadow remain under strict command, but something in the bond between girl and dog defied protocol. Shadow listened to Lily the way he never listened to anyone else, as though he understood not just the sound, but the meaning, the urgency, and the danger behind it. That evening, the moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the edges of Oakridge. Claire and Shadow walked quietly behind Lily, who moved with careful determination, her small frame guided by instinct and courage. Lily tugged gently at Shadow's ear, then pointed toward the dark line of woods at the edge of the town, her eyes wide with fear, but firm with purpose. Claire hesitated for only a moment, knowing every rule said no, but seeing the girl's silent insistence, seeing Shadow's body stiffen with recognition, she gave a single nod, a quiet permission to follow. The dog lunged forward, nose to the ground, ears alert, and Claire followed, keeping her flashlight steady, heart thumping with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The woods were thick with shadows, the branches scratching at Claire's jacket as she pushed forward. But Shadow moved with ease, confident and precise. Lily's fingers gripped his fur, guiding him, teaching him the invisible path she had seen in her mind. Hours of searching had led them to this moment, a place hidden and silent, where the air smelled faintly of damp earth, and something else, something forgotten, abandoned too quickly. Shadow's hackles raised, a warning that made Claire's stomach tighten, and Lily pressed her small hand against his side, urging him forward, deeper into the dark undergrowth. Finally, they found it, a partially concealed entrance, barely visible beneath the roots of an old oak. Shadow paused, sniffing, then nudged the door open with his nose. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, carrying the faint scent of recently disturbed soil. Claire's flashlight revealed the walls, bare and scratched, small handprints etched across the surface as though the room had been a prison for the smallest of captives. Blankets were pushed aside, footprints marked the dirt floor, and there was a sense of immediate danger that had only just been abandoned. Lily pressed her forehead against Shadow's side, whispering the smallest sound, a comfort and a signal all at once. Claire's mind raced, realizing that this was more than evidence. It was a map of fear, a trail left by a child who had survived where others had not. Shadow's body remained tense, ready, protective, unwilling to let them be surprised by whatever had been here moments before. Claire knew, in that instant, that the girl's signals had saved them from walking blindly into a nightmare, that the bond between child and dog was stronger than any rule, and that this discovery would lead them closer to stopping the person who had stolen voices and lives in silence. Claire sat in the small, cramped briefing room, the hum of fluorescent lights above her, a steady reminder that the department was watching, judging, waiting for her to falter. Captain Harris leaned against the table, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Claire," he said, voice low but firm, "you've gone too far. You can't build a case on a mute child and a dog that won't follow protocol." Shadow disobeyed direct orders. "We can't stand behind this." His words were precise, cutting, but Claire felt none of their sting because she had already seen the truth. Shadow had been right, instinctive and unwavering, and Lily had been leading him exactly where she needed to go. Shadow sat beside her, ears perked, amber eyes scanning the room with alert suspicion. Every time the door opened, every shadow that fell across the linoleum, he stiffened, growled low, a warning that made the hairs on Claire's neck rise. The room was filled with doubt, tension, and whispers of disbelief, but Shadow's presence was a silent declaration of loyalty and focus. Claire glanced down at Lily, who sat clutching her sketchpad, eyes wide and intent. Every drawing she had made pointed to the same man, the same cane, the same hollow stare. Each line, each careful stroke, was a map of memory and fear, a language no one else could read but the dog understood. Claire felt her resolve harden. They had no video evidence, no eyewitness willing to testify, and no confession from the man who had caused so much harm. But they had something stronger. They had instinct, trust, and a bond that refused to be ignored. Every time the man with the cane appeared in the surveillance feed, every time his shadow fell across the city streets, Shadow's growl cut through the doubt like a blade. No hesitation, no wavering. The canine refused to be wrong. Claire had followed him through alleys, abandoned warehouses, and darkened woods. She had seen what others dismissed, and now she knew the weight of the dog's intuition. The room murmured with skepticism as Harris shook his head. "You're chasing ghosts, Claire. You're putting the department at risk for—" "What? A girl who won't speak and a dog who won't obey?" Claire's hand rested on Shadow's back, feeling the tension in his muscles, feeling the certainty in his posture. "He's not a ghost," she said quietly, but with authority. "And Lily isn't a child without a voice. They've both been telling us the truth all along. We've just been too blind to listen." Lily held up her sketchpad, her small fingers trembling slightly, but her eyes met Claire's with trust and courage. Shadow growled again, louder this time, the sound echoing in the room. It was a growl that said danger, a growl that said follow, a growl that demanded attention. Claire felt a surge of certainty. No bureaucratic orders, no skeptics, no rules could silence what had been right in front of them all along. Shadow had led them true, Lily had drawn them the path, and together they had carved a trail through fear, doubt, and silence. Claire took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and met the captain's gaze. "We follow the trail," she said, her voice steady, "and we trust what Shadow and Lily are telling us. It's the only way to stop him." Shadow's tail thumped once against the floor, a quiet confirmation, a heartbeat of truth that filled the room with undeniable certainty. The night was thick and heavy with mist as Claire ran, her boots pounding against wet pavement, her heart racing to match the rhythm of Shadow's powerful strides. The streets of Oakridge were nearly empty, the city hushed as if it sensed what was about to happen. Shadow's ears were forward, his nose low, and every muscle in his body was coiled with purpose. He didn't look back, not once, but Claire felt his presence beside her like a tether, guiding her through the dark alleys, over chain link fences, and into the dense woods at the edge of town. The wind whipped against her face, carrying with it the faint, haunting sound of muffled cries that made her stomach twist. Shadow had caught the scent, the trail invisible to anyone else, but unrelenting and clear to him. Claire's breath came in sharp, uneven gasps, but she kept running, keeping pace with the dog who had become more than a partner, more than a friend. He had broken all the rules, defied orders, and for what? For moments like this, for truths no one else could see. She could feel the electricity in the air, the tension of impending confrontation, and the knowledge that a child's life depended on their speed and determination. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist. Every rustle of leaves made her flinch. But Shadow pressed forward, unwavering, a force of instinct and loyalty. Finally, they reached a clearing, and in the dim light of the street lamp, Claire saw it, the van, dark and silent, parked like a predator waiting for its prey. Shadow crouched low, his growl rumbling from deep within his chest, warning the abductor, signaling Claire to stay back. The man inside the van moved slowly, methodically, his hands near the sliding door, and a small, trembling child huddled inside, her eyes wide with fear. Lily had been right. Shadow's instincts had never lied. Claire's hands clenched into fists, but she stayed low, trusting the dog to lead. Without hesitation, Shadow leapt forward, teeth bared, the sound of his growl slicing through the night. The van screeched, tires spinning on the wet ground. But the man froze, startled by the sudden force of a canine who would not be ignored. Claire raced beside him, shouting, her voice a mix of command and reassurance, trying to calm the child and keep her safe. Shadow's body slammed against the door, forcing it open with relentless strength, and the child tumbled out into Claire's arms. The relief in her eyes was immense, silent but piercing, and Claire whispered softly, "You're safe now. You're safe." The abductor scrambled, realizing he was caught, but the combined force of Claire and Shadow cornered him, leaving nowhere to run. Sirens wailed in the distance, backup finally responding, but Shadow stayed vigilant, ears swiveling, growl never fading, making sure the child remained protected. That night, Claire knew the rules had been broken for a reason. Trusting Shadow had saved a life, and no protocol, no order, could ever outweigh that truth. The night had a different weight, heavier and colder than before, as Claire and Shadow followed the faint trail through the back streets of Oakridge. The fog hung low, curling around streetlights and casting everything in a gray haze that seemed almost unreal. Shadow's paws hit the pavement in quick, precise rhythm, his body low and tense, every sense alert. Claire's hands were steady on her sidearm, though her nerves screamed beneath the surface. They were close, closer than ever. She could feel it in the rigid set of Shadow's shoulders, the way his ears flicked toward every sound, the way his eyes glimmered amber in the mist. He had found the abductor again, and this time it looked like he wasn't leaving. They turned a corner and saw him. The man, tall and dangerous, had tossed his cane aside, his movements sharp and deliberate. A gun glinted in his hand under the dim light, and the other child he had snatched earlier was huddled behind him, small and shaking. Shadow growled low, a sound that vibrated through the air, a warning as primal as any word. Claire could feel every hair on his back bristle with tension, every muscle coiled to strike. She knew then that the rules, the orders to wait, to keep the dog under control, didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except getting the children to safety. Without a second thought, Shadow lunged, his powerful body a blur of motion. The abductor stumbled backward, guns swinging wildly. Claire fired once, the shot echoing through the night, a sharp punctuation in the chaos. She could hear the children crying out in fear, but also in relief, and she felt a surge of determination. Shadow didn't hesitate. He knocked the man off balance, jaws snapping near enough to make the threat clear without harm yet. The abductor tried to fight, his hand twitching toward his weapon, but Shadow's weight pressed him down, keeping him grounded. Claire moved in, heart pounding, and grabbed the gun arm, twisting it away, forcing him to the ground. In the midst of the struggle, Lily showed a courage Claire had never seen before. The other child had frozen, terrified, but Lily stepped forward, small hands out, shielding them. Her body trembled, but she stood her ground, defiance in her wide, fearful eyes. Claire felt a surge of pride as she whispered reassurance, while keeping her focus on subduing the man. Shadow stayed close, protective, and vigilant, growling when the abductor made any sudden movement, watching over the children as if they were his own. Finally, backup arrived. Officers surrounding the scene, weapons drawn, voices shouting, but it was already over. The abductor was pulled to his knees, restrained, and the children were rushed to safety. Lily clung to Shadow, burying her face in his fur, whispering small words that only he could hear. Claire knelt beside them, catching her breath, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Rules had been shattered, orders had been ignored, but lives had been saved. And in that moment, Claire knew that some bonds, some instincts, and some acts of loyalty were more powerful than any law. Shadow had proved it, and the children would never forget. The sun rose over Oakridge on a calm morning, its golden light falling softly across the streets that had once been shadowed by fear. At the police station, a crowd had gathered, officers and families alike, drawn not by ceremony or order, but by gratitude and awe. A mural stretched across the wall, bright and full of life, a permanent testament to courage and instinct. Shadow stood at the center, amber eyes alert, ears pricked, every muscle captured in the vibrant strokes, as though he could leap right off the brick at any moment. At his side, Lily smiled, small hands resting lightly on his back, the trust between them almost tangible in the painted brushstrokes. Other children, safe and laughing, surrounded them, their faces painted with wonder and hope, a stark contrast to the fear they had once known. The mural told a story that no words could fully capture, one of bravery that did not follow orders, of loyalty that ignored rules when lives were at stake. Officers who had doubted Claire, who had questioned Shadow, now paused and studied the painting with a mix of humility and respect. Each figure in the mural was infused with life, each expression conveying the emotions of that harrowing time: fear, determination, relief, and above all, the deep bond between a girl who had lost her voice and a dog who had never wavered. Claire stood beside the mural, hand resting lightly on Shadow's thick fur, feeling the warmth of him even as he remained calm, poised, a protector through and through. She thought of every moment that had led here, every silent signal, every decision that had gone against protocol, every instinct that had proven to be right. Parents and children whispered to each other, pointing out details of the mural, recognizing the places they had once feared, the alleyways, the shadows of abandoned buildings, the path that had led them to safety. Each line of paint seemed to capture a heartbeat, each color a memory of courage under pressure. Lily tugged gently at Shadow's ear, a quiet reminder of the night that had changed everything, the night that had defined not just his heroism, but the strength of the connection between them. Shadow nudged her hand with his nose, tail sweeping gently behind him, as though acknowledging the bond and the story immortalized on the wall. Claire knelt beside Shadow, pressing her forehead briefly to his soft fur, whispering softly, "You didn't just save her, Shadow. You saved us all." The canine leaned into her, calm and steady, amber eyes reflecting a quiet pride, the kind of pride that could never be captured in medals or accolades, only in lives that had been forever changed. Around them, the community stood in respectful silence, understanding that heroism was not always in following orders, that courage often came in listening to instincts, and that sometimes the smallest voice could guide the mightiest protector. The mural would remain, a permanent reminder of the dog who refused to heel, the girl who found her voice, and the truth that bravery and loyalty could rewrite the rules. Thank you for watching this video of A Dog's Devotion. If you liked this story, show your support with a like, and join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.